Somos Viña.
We Are Vineyard.
It's really hard to measure results when you're working with people because the only way we know how to measure usually is with numbers, and numbers are they're one-dimensional. They're not deep. And so we're doing alpha right now, and it's the biggest alpha we've ever done. And so that makes me feel good.
Right.
But last time we did alpha, there was 3 people there. Why don't I feel just as good about that?
Yes.
Those 3 people, their lives hopefully were impacted, and you just don't know. Like, this is what I'm trying to say, and this is something from working with youth ministry.
Yeah.
You work with someone for 4 years, and then
no idea.
You might not know for 15 to 20 more years what the real impact was.
Yes.
So you can't be like on any given Sunday night, well, that was a bad meeting, or only 4 kids showed up. Sometimes that's the meeting that person remembers. I don't have any good answers for you. One of the sayings that I grabbed hold of, it's an Andy Stanley saying, but I grabbed hold of it when we started the church: do for the one what you wish you could do for the many.
Yeah.
That's something we've tried to embody. Like, okay, we did a marriage night, 6 people came, but this is what we're saying we're going to do. One day we hope to bless more, but right now we're doing this. That's helped me a little bit.
Yeah.
So I found that helpful.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Patnick, talks with Christian Dunn. Christian is the lead pastor at the CityLight Vineyard Church in Delaware and is the National Youth Director for Vineyard USA. Let's listen in.
Christian, thanks for joining us for our podcast. We've worked hard to get this appointment. It's been real work, which either is because you're just super busy and important, or maybe I'm busy and important, or we're being resisted by the devil. What do you think? What's your opinion? What do you?
I always think blame Satan. I mean, that's when in doubt.
It's easier. Yeah, it is. It's way easier. Good. Okay. Well, let's go with that. Okay.
Or blame my kids. I mean, my kids got in the way a couple times too. So.
Okay. Blame. Yeah. If not Satan, your kids.
Yeah.
And then safe. And maybe how important we are. But you've listened to this, so let's go where all great stories begin, which is where you were born and where you grew up.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I have listened to a few of these just recently, so I knew what I was getting into. Just kidding.
That's funny. That's so
no,
good.
They were good. I have really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the approach of, getting to know real people in real ways, and also kind of the cross section. It's not all. Some leadership podcasts that I've listened to, I feel like are a little bit hard for me to relate to because they're all people leading multi-billion person global ministries. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, kudos.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I was born in New York. And then Buffalo, New York. And then my parents moved to Delaware pretty quickly after that. Well, I guess that's not technically true. They moved to Maryland. So what you need to know about my life is that Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, for those of you who don't know, they touch. So there's a tri-state area. And I have lived 45 of my 46 years within about a 5-mile radius, moving between those 3 states. So
wait. Hold on. Let me make sure I heard that correctly. 5-mile radius, but 3 states.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. That's a strange statistic. Like,
it is.
Not lots of humans could say that, I don't think.
I have felt at times a little bit like, what have I done with my life that I've just lived in this circle? I feel like there's other exciting things people do, but right now I live like 3 minutes from the house I grew up in, but I live in Pennsylvania and I grew up in Maryland. So
wow,
it's weird. Yeah.
Okay. Geography. I'm learning things.
A lot of people don't even know Delaware's a state, so I feel like that was probably helpful information for people.
There you go. We're all learning. We're here to learn today. And what did your folks do in Buffalo? Like, why were you born there, and then why move to Delaware? What's sort of grounding your family? What do they do? What did they do?
So DuPont. I don't know if in Denver you've heard of DuPont.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so back in the 70s and 80s, DuPont was huge. And my dad, I think you'll appreciate this, graduated from the Ohio State University.
I do appreciate that very much.
And Buckeyes are having a good season right now. So I was born a Buckeyes fan, even though I went to the University of Delaware. I chose to root for the Buckeyes over the Blue Hens.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
I'm shocked to hear it, honestly, because Anyway, so I won't. I'm not.
It's a more exciting program.
I'm sure they're great.
Yeah.
And so,
man.
so he works for DuPont in like engineering. He's a
chemical
sales
engineer that quickly moved into management, and then, kind of chased the career from Virginia to New York to Maryland to Virginia to Delaware. Landed in Delaware when I was, around 1 year old, and so he lived in Maryland, worked in Delaware. Right, you got that storyline.
Yep, got it.
And so then he didn't have to move for a long time. We stayed there, so that worked out for him. He moved in the organization multiple times while I was growing up, but we never had to leave the area, so that was great. And my mom was a nurse, but a big part of my story is about a year before I was born, she got really ill and was diagnosed with lupus, which is an incurable chronic disease of the immune system. And for some people, it can be quote unquote mild. I wouldn't ever say that that's mild for anybody.
Right.
But it's manageable, livable. And for my mom, it became progressively worse over her life, and also kind of like a magnet for other issues. So, there were seasons of like better and worse times, but most of my childhood was really, and the family really, circled around this illness. And, so that's why I'm named Christian. For those of you who might not know, my mom was told, like, if you get pregnant, you're going to have, like, she was on all these really strong medicines. And so she feels that she felt that the Lord healed her to carry me. Wow. And then they named me Christian. I'm surprised she wasn't upset, because then it came back. So God's, his healing was short-lived, but, and it's okay. We joke about all this stuff. We have kind of the gallows humor in our family. Just, I hope it doesn't make people uncomfortable. But when you're raised like routinely going to the hospital or having ambulances called to your house, like, you just have, if you don't laugh, you'll, I don't know, dig a hole and jump in it. But
well, so you had a giveaway there, which is she believed God gave her that. So that means faith is like in your family, like you're going to church, or was this sort of a means by which faith became more solid in your family?
That's a great question. So my mom had some sort of faith, but it wasn't super strong. And my dad did not know the Lord until into the marriage. So I don't think the Lord, and I don't know, I mean, I guess she felt that in the moment. I don't know what my dad thought about that necessarily at the moment. But yeah, eventually he got saved, and then we were Methodist until about 12 years old. And then strangely enough, my sixth grade teacher invited us to this church. I was really close to my sixth grade teacher, and she was really nice. And so anyway, invited us to check out this church, and it was very different than Methodist. So for those, Bruce and Lynn Latchell pastored a church called The Barn, and it was charismatic with deep Jewish roots. So my first meeting was a small group, so that was good. It kind of warmed me up. My second meeting, they met in a renovated barn. We sat, it was built as a circle so that no one was at the front, quote unquote. Jewish dancing happened during worship in the middle, circular Jewish dancing. And and you say all those things and you're like, wow, like an engineer and a nurse, like, we fell in love with the church instantly. And
okay, hold on, wait, time out. So before this, you're like actual Methodist, like you're going to church on Sundays, Methodist church, or is it like we're Methodist, we'll go to church?
I was an acolyte. I wore the white robe and lit the candles.
Okay, so you're like actual Methodist, like we're doing the thing where you like go and there's like a world we live in. Sixth grade teacher says you should come to this thing.
Right.
So no robes, no candles, circular seating in a barn with Jewish dancing. And then you just pivoted into, and we were like, oh, we're in. Like, what? You're old enough.
I mean, if that's not God.
well, exactly. But like at sixth grade, you're at least present enough to be able to say, yeah, here's what we were thinking, or here's what we talked about, or here's what seemed to make sense. So what is it about what happened? Like, how do you make sense of that?
So I think our family was hurting. It was really hard on everybody, and the illness, right? And my parents' marriage was, they were doing the best they could, but no one had ever prepared them for this. And they had a good connection with the Methodist pastor who then got moved. And the new Methodist pastor was not the same and didn't have the connection, the bedside manner. And so I think we were kind of floating, as much as I knew as a 11-year-old, 12-year-old. And like I said, the first thing we did was this small group. And there's probably people listening who know Pam and Vern Wittenbach. They opened their home to us. And this is just like, I think, how the body of Christ is, right? Just this random couple opens their home to a hurting family. And I remember just being there for 4 hours playing with their kids and my parents being welcomed in and loved. And, and then the only other thing I can say is we legitimately felt like God was in that place. Like when we went to the barn and worship and it was so different, but people loved being at church and they loved God. And like, I'm not bashing Methodism. Like I think there's wonderful people there, but I didn't find it exciting. I mean, I didn't. And then I went to church and it was like, wow, like stuff's happening. Like, and I'm putting adult words into a kid's head now, but it was like, God's alive, God's real. There's something happening here. I think my parents felt hope. The pastors, Bruce and Lynn, came alongside my parents, believed in God being able to work miracles in their lives, not necessarily just for physical healing, but for the family to find hope and to find healing. And we did. Like our family went through hard times, but thrived because of the care of that church. This small church, like 100 people in the woods of Pennsylvania, But I could never say enough about how much that church and Bruce and Lynn in particular changed the course of our family's history and my life particularly.
Wow. Yeah, so listening to you, it sounds like you're saying, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying that specifically your mom's illness was sort of a defining characteristic of your family. Like this is like a key piece of how we think about a week or we think about a day. Like this is a good day or this is not a good day or this has been a good week. Maybe we can do this or not do that or whatever. And the fact that you're just involved in medical care is just like normal. Like we're going to have to take trips to the hospital or there's tests to be taken or things to be managed. Now, of course, when you're a sixth grader, that's just your life. You're not thinking, oh, there's another way people live. This is just our life. But now as an adult, you're looking back going, no, that was a pretty defining characteristic of our family. And the church we were in, something changed and it wasn't quite as connected. Like, so what it meant to care for our family was to be involved in that dynamic. And then when that sort of changed to be in a church that actually was caring and connected to that reality, made it so you felt seen and supported and cared for. Describe a little bit more what that means, because, those of us who are in ministry, there's families that are in chronic health care phenomenon. That's just part of what it is to pastor. What is it that you experienced when you said they really took care of us? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, some of what happened can only happen in a smaller church, but we felt like they familyed us. I would say that's the number one thing. Like we weren't attending a church. We were together with, very, very quickly we were welcomed in and felt to be part of them. And I felt like my mom got friends, my dad got friends, I got friends, right? Like we were, yeah. I think that's a big part of it. Not just the leaders, but the whole church really embraced us.
This is going to sound like I'm being too specific, but I'm really curious. When you say we felt like, does that mean we're going to people's homes and they're coming to our home? Does it mean we're going to different kinds of small groups, or the youth group felt like, what was this sort of tangible Velcro? Like what made it so it felt like a stick or felt like family? Tell me what that means.
What's so funny is you say that, and I just like thinking maybe this is why I am such a stickler about people going to small groups. Like
Yep.
as a lead pastor now, I harp on it, and I really think if I had to like pin it down to two things, it would be Pam and Vern's small group in their house that we went to for years.
Yeah.
And Bruce and Lynn in particular. Pastoring a smaller church, you have time. And they met with my parents. They prayed with my parents. And also, like, Bruce just is like an unending source of like energy as far as like holding classes and worship meetings and prayer meetings. And so there's always stuff going on. Like, it wasn't just Sunday morning. Like,
Yes.
we could be around the people of God and in the presence of God multiple times a week.
Yes.
And a lot of my core memories of my teenage years happened in that church building. A worship meeting, hanging out with friends after youth group, getting prayer by people, at a Holy Spirit meeting. Just so much of my life, like church was the center of my life more so than school it's weird. And not everybody gets to grow up that way, but it was, and obviously it impacted what I decided to do with the rest of my life too. Right.
Yeah, obviously. But the things you're saying, again, are easy to pass by because you're familiar with them, but they're worth like thinking about for a second. So a small church, you said we went to the same small group for years. Okay, so let's think in like a boring way here for a second. Let's think in a week increment. That means in any given week, you're going to church on Sunday, small group on, let's say, Wednesday, youth group on Thursday, or whatever. I'm just picking a day.
Yep.
And then there's any number of other things you're saying, like, and then there would be this class or that worship night or whatever. So and you said they would sit and pray with my parents, which I imagine is either in your home, in their home, at one of these things.
Right.
Whatever that is. And we've been talking about this a lot in the life of our local church here in Denver, just the power of having things people can just move in and out of. Mm-hmm. It can get to where as a pastor, especially if your church starts to grow, where you're like, oh my gosh, we did this meeting. There were only like 15 people there.
Yeah.
Like, was that worth doing all the things? Like preparing the teaching, having a worship person there, turning on the sound system, making the coffee, whatever. That was like a lot of work for that Saturday morning or that Sunday night or that Thursday night. The youth group, there's only 10 kids in our youth group. Like, gosh, this is a lot of work. We show up and we buy the junk and the parents have to drop their kids off and the da-da-da. Like, maybe we should just do this every other week. Yeah. Or maybe we'll do that once a month. Or maybe, you just start like saying, let's get more bang for our buck. How do we be more efficient here? But there is something about just having like fluid environments where pastors are pastors and leaders are leaders. And you just are yourself with people. Like, you hang out a little bit after. Or hey, let's just meet up early. Let's get dinner before the meeting. Love to hear how you're doing. But you have to kind of build that way of living as a leader. Because we've been musing about this because, exactly like you're describing. When I was coming into the Vineyard Church, which, by the way, the one I was in Columbus was a big church, but kept that ethos of like, we're just kind of doing this. I'm telling you, Christian, there was almost nothing I wouldn't show up for.
Right.
Like, if there was a thing on Tuesday night on whatever, like healing one or prayer training, whatever, or spiritual maturity class on learning the disciplines, I would just go. Like, it didn't occur to me I wouldn't just go. Why wouldn't I just go? Like, I'm hungry. I want to learn. I want to grow. And now on the other side as a pastor, I think about those meetings and how many of them were like 15 people.
Right. Yeah.
And now as a person leading, and by the way, the church was like 2,000 people at the time.
Yeah. So 15 feels even smaller.
Oh, it's like nobody.
Yeah.
But you know what? The church, something about the culture of the church was like, no, we are training people. This is what we do. We create environments, we train people, and we give, up and coming leaders opportunities to participate in that. Because next thing I know, I'm teaching those classes.
Yeah.
And I would show up with bells on. Like I'm
Right.
teaching 10 people healing prayer. And I'm sure any number of pastors like, oh, thank God, I don't have to go do that thing. Jay's going to do that. I would come like praying, like memorizing the scriptures.
You're all in.
I am, because this is like this is my moment. I get to teach. I don't know how to do this. I'm so excited. Right. And I'm leading a small group and I'm showing up at youth group. Talk about that a little bit, because you're saying that was a small church thing, but it can be a large church thing, but it's a culture thing. And you just said you learned something about yourself. Like, maybe this is why I harp on small groups so much. Now you're leading a church, you have kids, you're busy. How do you think about all that? Like, as you think about even your history or leading, this isn't like easy to figure out.
No, it's not. And also like times change and people change and okay, I had a couple of thoughts while you were talking. One is it's really hard to measure results when you're working with people. And so especially if you decide to, because the only way we know how to measure usually is with numbers, and numbers are just, they're one dimensional. They're not deep. And so, we're doing alpha right now, and it's the biggest alpha we've ever done. And so that makes me feel good.
Right.
But last time we did alpha, there was 3 people there. Why don't I feel just as good about that?
Yes.
Like those 3 people, their lives hopefully were impacted, and you just don't know. Like, this is what I'm trying to say, and this is something from working with youth ministry.
Yeah.
Like, you work with someone for 4 years, and then you don't know.
No idea.
And you might not know for 15 to 20 more years what the real impact was.
Yes. So
you can't be like on any given Sunday night, well, that was a bad meeting, or only 4 kids showed up. Like, sometimes that's the meeting that person remembers. I think it's, I don't have any good answers for you, but I do just, one of the sayings that I grabbed hold of, it's an Andy Stanley saying, but I grabbed hold of it when we started the church, and he says, like, do for the one what you wish you could do for the many.
Yeah.
And that's something we've tried to embody. Like, okay, like, we did a marriage night, 6 people came, like, but this is what we're saying we're going to do. One day we hope to bless more, but right now we're doing this. That's helped me a little bit.
Yeah.
So I found that helpful,
and it's hard, like, because rightfully so, there's a lot of teaching and emphasis on building your own personal health, pastoral health as pastors. Have your margins, make sure you have your Sabbath, and which I think is really important. I mean, we emphasize strongly in the life of our church and our pastors. And I try to talk to our leaders about almost all the good stuff happens in between. Almost all the good stuff is in the car trip to the meeting, is hanging out in the lobby of the church after the meeting, is going to the Applebee's with the youth group kids. Almost all the good stuff happens in the in-between. So sometimes the meeting is just so you can get the in-between.
Yeah.
Like if you walk out of the meeting going, I don't know, the guitar player broke a string and sang out of tune. Like, I'm just so discouraged. I just want to go home. And you miss the opportunity in the parking lot where you check in, or you miss the opportunity where you could come a little early and meet some people as they come in and hear their story. Almost all the good stuff happens in between. And that's what I hear you describing is like, there's all these environments where we're just getting prayer, these environments where I'm just with people. The net effect of that, because I bet if I pressed you and I was like, tell me about the best 5 youth group meetings you were in, you'd be like, I don't even know. There's this one and I went to like 150 and I can remember one sort of.
Right.
But the net effect is transformation in your family. And what's interesting to me is you identify chronic health being in the middle. Part of what helped was just people just being around. available, accessible.
She never got healed, right? Even in a church that preached and practiced physical healing, and that would have been everybody's. We all wanted that, and we prayed so many times, right?
I bet.
And that didn't happen, and our family ended up not being angry at God, but leaning in more to God and community. So it was the small groups, it was the meals when things were going wrong, right? Like it was the people who, would come hang out with me when my dad was taking her to the hospital. Like, and there's just hundreds of those stories, right? Like I think it's being the body of Christ. And so this is one reason why I think small groups, for instance, to go back to that.
Yeah.
You're saying it's in the in-between. I have a hard time even preparing for small group that I lead sometimes, because I'm like, the Bible study is going to be good. And we love to read the Bible together. And I love the Bible, but it's going to be while we're eating before and just talking about our lives.
Yep.
That like, then you find out what so-and-so is actually going through. And then you can text them afterwards, or you can, and like, then we start to actually go from consumers to participants. And I think it's hard. It takes so much more investment, but yeah, I think I learned that from Bruce and Lynn.
Cool.
They're just all in type people and pastors. And, I hope that my wife and I are able to do that to some extent for the people in our church.
It's beautiful. Okay. So back to your story, because I'm sorry we had a little diversion there, but what I'm aware of is how many humans are in our churches right now that are in that life circumstance. God has brought them to your church, and it took them a lot to get there. Mm-hmm. This was a hard day. This was a hard week. Or they're not all there. Only dad and one of the kids can make it this week because mom's not feeling well, or they got there, but man, they're barely there. Like, we're just looking to get out of here at the end of this thing. And the fact that you had a great moment with one kid, that kid had a moment with God.
Yep.
Even though it was like 10 minutes, and they're going to have to go home and try to manage the rest of this day. Man, that was like life for them in that Sunday. I'm just so aware of that every time we gather, that we always have an emphasis, rightly so, towards building leaders and creating a context of expectancy. And is there faith? And is it and how do we help connect people? And blah, 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 blah. But we lose track often of just the potent value of pastoral care, of just the presence, of just being with people, creating an environment for them to be somewhere where there's hope, there's something of the kingdom. Man, that stuff transforms people's lives over time. Yep. So I'm really grateful for that them leading you in that way. Okay, so then you grow up through middle school and then to high school. And when did you start thinking, man, maybe I'm going to do ministry? This might be like what I want to do with my life.
I mean, I think that the thought of being a leader started when I was on a YWAM trip, probably around 14 years old. And I had a moment there where, there was just this call forward, and I was like, yeah, I'm all in, right? Like, beyond just being a follower, like a Christian, like, do you want to just say, actually, God, I'm going to give my life in a way that's like, spend me however you want to spend me, And it really, I think it started there. It had been building with the ministry at the barn. And then, so there's like a confluence of a couple of things. There's that, there's a Bible study leader in my life who lets me start leading a small group when I'm like 14. But really, the thing that changes is I go to Bruce at 16 and I'm like, listen, we've had on again, off again, great volunteer youth leaders, some of whom I still know, but no one's here now. And we have teens, and like, I just want to ask you, like, do you have any thoughts who you could find? And, just like you were talking about your story, like that pastor who's glad you're teaching that course. Yeah. He's like, well, Christian, why don't you just do it? And so, and he fully endorsed and empowered me and his son to start a youth group Bible study. And, I mean, what's crazy is that was probably, I doubt he had like a huge aha moment with God, right? He's just being himself. That's who he is. He's a releaser, right? Like an IC and U type person. Yeah. And he's like, you could do this. And not only to say you can do this, but he just empowered me to do it. Yeah. He was like, you figure it out. where should it meet? Who should you invite? Like, I'll back you up, but like, pray about it. Like, it's on you. And so I'm 16 years old. I'm crying out to God, and and my friends who are running it with me were praying weekly. So that conversation, like, this could be hours of conversation, but the basic, the overview is we start this Bible study with 12 people. We start inviting people from school. It grows to like 50, 60, 70, 80.
Wow.
We have to move out of my house into the church. Then, like, fast forward a couple years, other youth groups are like, hey, God's doing something neat. Can you come talk at our youth group? And we do that twice, and we're like, we should do this more often. And so we do a youth conference. Like, my co-leader's like, we should do a youth conference. I'm like, so we're 18. We don't know anybody. We mail out, like, there's a traveling minister that we meet, and he gives us his mailing list, and we mail out to his whole mailing list. Come to this conference.
Wow.
There will be no big name speakers. Everyone who's talking and doing worship is under 20. Our church underwrites the hotel thousands of dollars. 700 teenagers come.
Whoa.
And it launches this incredible, this neat season of life where we start traveling around every month doing youth conferences all up and down the East Coast.
Wow.
And that all started from Bruce being like, hey, yeah, you should just start. Why don't you just do youth ministry?
So was it mostly Vineyard folks, or just anybody?
We weren't Vineyard at this time.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So this is where I met the Vineyard. On the road, Vineyard started inviting us in. I met Phil Strout. We were in Lewiston. We were in Mechanics Fall. We were in Massachusetts and Connecticut. I met a bunch of the leaders, and I remember coming home being like, Vineyard's just like us. Like,
wow.
Yeah. So that was, that's kind of how things got started. And, there's a lot to that, but it was a very special
Well, it
time
sounds
in
like
life.
chaos. I'm trying to imagine 700 kids in a hotel. Like, what is going to happen in that hotel? I don't even want to know, but
that year, nothing terrible. Although my suitcase did get stolen on the last day. So I lost my, when you go to a conference and you're one of the speakers, you bring your best clothes. I lost the best part of my wardrobe. I'm still upset about it. But
that somebody just took it. Like, I'd like this. Yeah.
I'll take that suitcase. Yeah.
That's so funny. Wow.
No,
it
was amazing. And we saw God speaking through us and leading people to Christ, and we saw people's lives getting touched, and we saw all sorts of weird stuff too, but it was exciting. Sure.
Well, and what strikes me is if people aren't paying attention, they hear the last part first, which is 700 kids, conferences all up and down the East Coast. Sure, that's great, but what I'm really struck by is how it's just doing the little things in a little context faithfully over time begins to create momentum that God is doing something with that then serves the larger body.
Yeah.
Almost all ministry I've ever seen that's lasting and useful starts in a really kind of silly way, a small way.
Yeah.
That makes an impact over time. And it starts with one leader saying, sure, you should try that.
You can't now that I'm an adult, I'm probably the same age, maybe a couple years older than when he said yes to this.
Wow.
And Bruce and Lynn, and I know I've talked about them a lot, but like, just imagine, okay, you're a senior pastor in a locale, and you're letting your teenagers do a conference, and other pastors come to this conference and bring their youth groups, and you don't have control, and they start doing some weird stuff.
Sure.
And I know, because I talked to him as we got older, it was hard for him. Like,
how could it not be? Yeah.
Exactly. But he never took control.
Wow.
He never wrestled control back, even when it was like, there's hundreds of people. Like, he continued saying, you guys need to speak. Like, we're praying for you. We're advising you. We'd have meetings upon meetings about ideas and advisement.
I bet
right?
you did.
Like,
right.
Yeah. And we wouldn't always agree, but like, he always his default was, okay, well, you guys need to do what God's telling you to do. As long as, like, obviously we weren't outside of scripture. We weren't like,
sure.
But I just think it's just one of those, and we all know it to be true, that when you give power, like, it's hard to give power away, real power, real authority. But it also, like, that's the only way people really sink or swim. You know, he didn't just give me, like, hey, manage the mailing list. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be who I am today if he hadn't given me those opportunities, like, progressively those opportunities, right?
So good.
Yeah. Both of them. I say he, but it's both of them. Bruce and Lynn together. I mean, they filled different functions, but they traveled with us. Like, when we would travel, oftentimes Lynn would travel in cars with teenagers with no role other than to be in the background praying. And she's a certified, like, pastor, master's in counseling. She can teach, and she's just like, I'll be in the background. I just don't know many adults who do that.
No.
You know, and we had more than one.
Incredible.
who did that for us. So, you know, that's why I think I ended up doing youth ministry for most of my life. And one of the themes that I pressed my whole life was, you know, let's get teenagers doing the ministry.
Yeah.
You know, it's obvious to make the connections there, right? But it changed my life, and I thought this might change other people's lives too.
Yeah.
So,
so at 18, you're leading all this stuff. So that's as you're graduating high school.
Mm-hmm.
Do you then say, well, I'm obviously going to go be a pastor? How do I do the next thing?
I did want to be a pastor, but Bruce's advice to me, which I thought was good, was, you know, you should probably get a degree in something, because pastors don't always get paid. So I went to the University of Delaware while doing the traveling ministry, got my degree, headed towards pastoral counseling, so I could be a Christian counselor if I needed to be. Got married in between my junior and senior year, and then started getting my master's degree. And then it was on the road to Baltimore to a class for a master's degree where I felt the Lord, one of those moments I felt the Lord really speak to me. And I felt like he said, you know, you got to put away the backup plan. And it was hard, because I think maybe the best thing I am in life is a student.
Right.
So ending my student career was like saying, oh, I'm closing the best chapter of my life.
Yeah, it's costly. Right.
And pridefully, I don't know if this is pridefully, but like I've always wanted to get a master's. My dad has a master's, but I felt like the Lord asked me to lay that down and just say, go all in on ministry. And then not too long after, the traveling ministry died. And so I didn't have my master's, and I didn't have a traveling ministry. And I, you know, basically, and I had a kid on the way. And so I went to Bruce and Lynn, and I was like, I think you might need to hire me to do something at the church.
Yeah, I need a job.
Officially.
Right. Totally. Yeah, totally.
So, you know, I spent all those traveling ministry years looking at these 30-year-old youth pastors being like, I'm never going to be a 30-year-old youth. Look at these. How did they not find something better to do with their lives?
Totally.
And so I got hired on as the youth pastor, and I did that until I was in my late 30s. So.
Well, and it went really well, as it turns out. Like, yeah, well, that's my experience. I mean, at a distance, like, life's going pretty well. Yeah. Well, okay. So then you end up on staff. When does the church join the Vineyard?
You know, I wish I thought I should have looked at
somewhere in there. Yeah.
Early 2000s. Early 2000s. Right around, we built a building, we joined the Vineyard. It was a great decision. And the opportunity to be part of Vineyard Youth Ministry, and the people that I've met through that has been one of the greatest joys of my ministry life, right? Like, I haven't talked a lot about my wife or my kids. They're obviously the most important part of my life. But
yes,
ministry-wise, the Vineyard has been just such a gift. And yeah.
So talk about that. So now, you know, at this stage of your life, you're still serving and helping the Vineyard with youth ministry across the country, and of course locally and regionally. What would you say, as you look at like kind of what people are trying to do, how that works, what would you say that you realize has changed? Like, man, I used to just do these 3 things, and now there's like 5 other things that I have to try to figure out how to do. I mean, are you noticing shifts in what you think is helpful or not helpful with
in youth ministry from like 20 years ago to now?
Yeah.
Well, I think as I say them, people will say this is obvious, right? But I think social media is a huge game
It's
changer.
massive. Yeah.
I don't think we still fully understand how it is affecting kids' mental health and stealing time from their lives and discipling them
Yep.
with really shallow and like lacking of foundation thoughts, right? Like thoughts that are 2 sentences long that make them change their mind about things they've believed their whole life. Like I have to be careful not to talk too negatively about social media. There are good things about social media.
Sure.
But there's so much opportunity for evil.
Yeah, it's a grand experiment. Right.
Yeah. And it's brand new as far as the history of the world's concerned.
Yep.
So, and I would say also like the understanding and awareness of mental health was not, I was really lucky because our church in particular, because of Lynn being a counselor, we had a particular bent towards, we didn't call it mental health back then, but towards caring for people's, as far as therapy and counseling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a whole new ball game too, like the awareness of the mental health needs of teenagers. And I don't think that was really talked about at a large scale, that now it is definitely being talked about a lot, which I think is good. But I also think the pendulum swings. So sometimes I'm like, even with my own children, I'm like, I don't know if I should say this, but I guess I'll say it. Like where's the pendulum stop from like, this is definitely a mental health issue to like,
right.
This is something you have to learn how to work through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you're going to go through hard things. How do I help you process hard things versus, you're kind of in danger now. This has moved
That's
from
a good way of saying it. Thanks, Jay.
Stress that helps me grow to, this is injury now. You're hurt.
Right.
There's a difference. I mean, and those aren't, I would say that at least my experience, even in the last 10 years, how that's measured is changing.
That's
so
true.
What you used to refer to as normal stress is now seen as injurious or quote unquote triggering, or how do we build safe environments for kids? That language has changed drastically in the last even 10 years, but definitely the last 20. So,
right.
Yeah, what was normal, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying it has changed. And there's lots of social commentary on this.
There is.
But it means that even training youth leaders has changed quite a bit. What are we training youth leaders to think about when they think about contact with kids being more accessible? Should we be constantly texting? How should we be using social media? How do we do that as youth workers, let alone encouraging kids and families? Like, so how do you think about that? Because you're in the trenches. You're with all kinds of youth pastors. What are you finding to be helpful by way of like thoughts?
Yeah, I think I find it helpful to have well spelled. You say something that I've totally stolen from you, is that kindness is clarity. Or no, other way around. I stole it from you, but I flipped it.
No, that's great. No, I like it. Now it's yours. See, that's all you have to do. You have to just change it a little bit.
Yeah,
and then
slightly.
Now it's your idea.
Doesn't make as much sense, but we'll go. But you were so kind. It really clarified things for me.
Clarity is kindness.
Clarity
I do agree.
Is kindness.
Yep.
And so setting up with people who are working with young people, this is what is okay and this is what is not okay. I mean,
yes.
In general, I really think you have to be careful about having social media interaction with teenagers.
Yep.
And texting, so I think you have to have spelled out boundaries. What are those going to look like?
Yep.
And to be honest, like if I'm going to have any sort of, online communication with a kid, it is first going to be with the parents.
Yep.
And I just think it's just better safe. It's better to be safe, Well, here's what I'll say is hard, Jay, because it'd be easy. What I'd like to say is just don't do it.
Right.
But
send carrier pigeons.
The reality is this is where they live. And so,
well, it's the only way they interact is through these means. Yes.
I don't know how you're supposed to, you're not going to email them.
Right.
So I've had to, and I'm working on this in my personal life too, but like, what are the best and appropriate ways to do that? I think it's a conversation that you have to be having, and the parents have to be part of it. I guess that's the best advice I'd say, because it probably isn't a one size fits all solution either. And that's why we also have to be aware of the people who are working with young people and understanding their maturity level, know, and their age, and what needs in their are they trying to get met through online interaction with younger people.
Yes.
I think those are all things someone's got to have their finger on the pulse of that.
Registration is now open for our 2024 Better Together Conference. Better Together is a Vineyard USA conference that seeks to thoughtfully discuss race, gender, reconciliation, and the multi-ethnic church while moving us intentionally towards being beloved community. This conference is for everyone. Even if you aren't a part of one of our formal associations, we would love to have you join as we grow together. Better Together will feature insightful plenary talks from dynamic national leaders, as well as multicultural worship led by a diverse group of worship leaders and musicians. Attendees will have an opportunity to attend workshops designed to equip and empower leaders to creatively champion kingdom diversity in their churches and communities. And each association will have a few specifically targeted workshops that are only for folks who are part of that association. It is only as we learn to better relate as sisters and brothers in Christ, dependent on the Holy Spirit, that we can be shaped into beloved community. If this excites you, we need you here at this conference. We are indeed better together. Check out the details on the Vineyard USA webpage or at bettertogether.vineyardusa.org. See you there.
Yeah, I mean, if I could talk every youth leader and even lead pastor into thinking intentionally about ministry with younger folks, if I could emphasize one thing, like wave my hand and magically it happens, it would be the greatest impact you're going to have in the life of kids and youth is with their parents. To the degree that you can have impact with parents and that you're seen as a teammate with parents in which they're actually the lead.
Yeah.
You're the second player. They're the first player, okay? And in that sense, you're really helpful if you see that you're in harmony or in continuity with parents and helping parents see more clearly. It's when that becomes separated. So now I'm interacting with your kid in a way that you're not on the page.
Right.
Or I don't even know who you are. That's really problematic because it leaves us open to all kinds of messes, but it also takes away the sort of authority of the parent themselves.
Yeah.
They have a role in this. With that said, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it is tempting to try to actually get in between the teen and the parents, because teenagers tend to like to talk about what their parents aren't doing right.
Precisely. Yep.
No matter how good their parents are.
Mm-hmm.
And teenagers are black and white.
Yes.
And so today they hate their parents, tomorrow they'll love them.
Mm-hmm.
And it is tempting. When I was younger in youth ministry, I felt this temptation to be like, oh, I get it. Yeah, parents. Yeah. And I come alongside of you and join forces like an alliance built against your parents.
Yes.
And that is so dangerous.
Yes.
And I would say also wrong. Excluding like when there's abuse or things like that are uncovered. Obviously, you have to step in. But in general, like understanding that, parents are people too, that they're people who aren't perfect, and your best, anything that you can do as a youth leader to work towards integrating their relationship with their parents in a healthy way.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Because you only get a couple hours with these teenagers a week. Their parents get them all the time.
Yes.
And so, I think sometimes we think we have, an inflated view of how much influence we actually have in these kids' lives.
Yes.
They're probably their friends first, their parents second. I don't know where we come in, but it's
right.
not first or second. So,
no, it shouldn't be either. If it is, that's a problem. And I do think there's parents, I mean, at least this has been my experience with our girls, and then even having watched and done some youth ministry, there are moments when parents will call in the second player for help. So I was just with a buddy of mine, and his son's just sort of coming apart. They're not actually in our church. They're not believers as far as I'm aware. But because I'm a pastor and we're buddies, he's like, hey, help me think through this. This is not good. And I was like, well, who has a voice in your son's life that's not you?
Right.
Because it sounds like a lot of the work he's doing right now is trying to differentiate from you. He's going, in order for me to be a man, I have to find a new way that's not with my dad. And so a lot of the conflict just sounds like him trying to figure out how to do that. Whose voice do you want heard in your son's life?
Yep.
That's not you. And I would say it's probably strong if it's probably a man. So fitting that sort of space in his life. And this buddy of mine went, I have no idea. Nobody.
Yeah.
There's no coach. There's no teacher. Nobody. And then he pauses. He says, I don't know, man. It's probably you. Like, you've been around him a few times and he really respects you.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, listen, man, I'd be willing to step in there, but you and I need to lay a few ground rules. Like, I want to be able to talk really freely with him without feeling like I have to inform you of everything.
Right.
But there are a few things I would inform you of if I thought, first of all, legally, I'm a mandatory reporter. So if these certain kinds of things happen, then I'm going to act on that. But I mean, more personally, if he's dealing with some kind of girl problem, I don't think it's probably right for me to bring that up to you. Or if he's really struggling and trying to figure something out about his life with God, I don't think it's probably right unless I ask his permission to share that confidential stuff with you. How do you feel about that as a dad? Like, what do you want to talk about? And I know for me as a dad, the language we're having with our girls now is like, you need pastors in your life.
Yeah.
I want you to have pastors in your life. I really want that. I'm praying for that for you as you're towards the end of high school and in college. Because, Christian, I'm sure it's true for you. It's true for me. We've been pastors in those kids' lives.
Yeah.
PKs and kids that grew up in church. We get to be pastors, which means I don't have the responsibilities of a parent. And as they're trying to become adults, I'm still trying to help them think about their family, because parents still are parents even after they leave the home. More and more, actually, people are staying in their home till they're in their late 20s. More and more, that's common sociologically.
Yep.
So that doesn't mean because they're grown up, they don't relate to their family. But those little nuances, but feeling like you're an ally with parents, you're helping parents, even as a lead pastor, part of my job is to help parents be parents. Those are really complex, and they feel more complex than they used to be. Maybe it's just I'm getting older, but it feels like the world's more complicated in a lot of these conversations.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice to give to your teen. I mean, I've tried to say that to our kids, like, because it's more complicated, even the fact that I'm their I'm their pastor and their dad, right? So like, they have never known a spiritual situation where I wasn't, in charge.
Exactly. Dad and pastor. Right.
Yeah. So a beautiful thing that the Vineyard gave to our family particularly was through doing winter retreats and Project Timothy's and missions trips, my kids got to meet my co-leader friends, right? Like other youth pastors. And even though they lived in different states, which isn't necessarily ideal for what we're talking about, but it just worked for us. Like, and we would say, listen, here are people we think you could talk to. Like, here are people we trust to give you sound advice. And they look up to these guys and girls who, like, they would meet in all these spiritual experiences, and then they would get prayed for by them, and they would build this trajectory where, like, wow, 3 or 4 times a year, 3 or 4 years in a row, like, here's these other adults who are having influence in their life. So that was a gift of Vineyard, because I always wondered and worried the whole pastor kid syndrome, So yeah, I think that's really smart advice. Find some other adults that maybe mom and dad endorse. Like, we don't want you getting advice from this person.
Right. Not just anybody. Right.
I mean, for real, that's legitimate. But here's 3 or 4 people we trust, and they don't have to tell us. and I feel like that's like freedom giving to your kid.
Yeah. We've agreed that they're not talking to us unless one of these 3 or 4 things is in play.
Yeah.
They think you're in danger in some way, or you're in an abusive pattern with someone.
Right.
Then they're going to raise their hand. But outside of that, talk about your life with God, talk about your emotional inner life. You can even talk about struggles you have with us, and we trust them. They care about us. They care about our family. Because the older they get, the more they need an outside influence. They need another voice. Especially if you want them to grow through their whole life with Jesus. They're going to need pastors and other leaders in their life.
And who else are they going to talk to? Like, if you put yourself in the place of a teenager or a young adult, like,
yes.
My second oldest is, 21. He's a junior in college. Like, is he supposed to share his doubts about God or his fears about the future with his friends that he's living with? Like,
exactly.
Maybe, but most of those friends at college aren't believers, and
right.
And then like, what, you're not going to do it online, right? Like, online, my son's not actually an online person, but for people who are, like,
right,
they're putting forward an image.
Yes.
And that's not usually going to be what's actually going on. I worry, I worry for young people. Like, where can you actually talk about the stuff that you need to talk about? It needs to get out from the inside to the outside. And in a culture where we're celebrating more and more just this like facade that we have to work hours and hours to keep up. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Well, and it's individuated to where it feels like there's no roadmap. Mm-hmm. Whatever feels good to you, whatever is going to work for you is probably fine.
Right.
Sounds freeing, but it actually makes you a slave because it means there's no real way to do anything. Yeah. So all the pressure's on me all the time, which, I think the scriptures are pretty clear. There are ways that things work in the world. Frankly, even doctors, they're like, no, that's not real. You need to sleep or whatever. Like there are ways that things work.
Yeah.
And so when you think about like the Vineyard as a whole, and you've been in any number of youth environments and stuff we do, you help coordinate so much of the youth work we do when we're meeting nationally or regionally. What are sort of your prayers? What do you feel like you're asking God for the Vineyard in this next kind of iteration?
I think if I'm being really honest, in the last, several years, my heart and attention has shifted from specifically teenagers to the people who work with teenagers in the Vineyard. Mm-hmm. And, that's a lot of my passion is can we support and resource and come alongside of these people who are, in large part doing this volunteer or partially volunteer, right? Like, I just think about those people, like, kind of going back to the small group thing. I'm thinking about those people who are like coming home from working all day, getting their house cleaned up and inviting 10 teenagers over to their house. Yeah. And maybe they're doing it because they happen to have a teenager, and they don't have any training. They maybe have a heart for Jesus, maybe a heart for young people. And I just think like whatever we as a movement can do to help those people succeed, because I think they're the heroes, right? Like, I know that there's, like whatever. I've led youth groups upwards of over 100, and I've also shrunk them down to 15.
Right.
I've done both of those, and I just think like the people who are really in the trenches working with 10 to 15 teens, I have a real heart for them, and I feel like what I've heard over the years is it's easy to be a youth worker in the Vineyard and feel isolated, disconnected, and unheard. So over my work of the last 5 to 10 years, I would hope a fruit of that, and I hope this is true, would be that more Vineyard workers feel connected and heard than they used to.
Yeah, totally.
That would be a win that I could be like, okay, like, when Paul says that, I hope I haven't run in vain. Like, right. If there's more youth workers feeling like, somebody knows my name, someone's got my back, I can call somebody if I need something, like, that's been kind of my thing. One of the goals I've been running at the last 5 years. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
no, it really does. And so if you I've taken a ton of your time, so I don't want to take too much more time. But if you were going to like speak, like let's imagine you have that army of youth leaders. Some, they're on staff at a church. The majority, exactly what you're describing. Full-time job, worked a long day, clean up their house, teenagers are coming over. They're not sure, is this going to be 5 or 25? Because you never really know. It's sort of like when you do small group, like I think we'll have about 10 people, but you really don't know. What do you think is important for them to know or hear or think about?
Yeah. Quick caveat before I answer that. I realized I do this where I play back what I've said in my head. I was listening to you too, I promise, but
yeah, multifaceted.
I said
That's
like
so
the heroes, were people with these smaller groups. I wasn't saying that if you lead a group of 100 to 300 to 500, you're not a hero. No. I think you are too. I know those guys and those girls, and they're freaking awesome. And what they're doing is also incredibly heroic. And we get a lot of them on my podcast, Red Point, talking about how to, it's just different. And I didn't mean to create a false divide there.
You're fine. Yeah.
To answer your question, what I guess what I would want to say, and I think I've said it before, right? So I can't come up with anything new on the spot, but I just think it matters. Like that's what I would tell people doing youth ministry, is that it matters. Like I really, to the core of my being, believe that working with teenagers is one of the most important things you can do with your life. And there was a season in my life, Jay, where I was like late 20s and I was like, why am I still in a room with teenagers? Like I've got 3 kids, I'm married. Do I not have a life? Like all the rest of my friends are like moving up the corporate ladder. They're whatever. They're in education. They're becoming principals. And I'm like, I'm literally in the same room I was when I was 16 years old. Literally, we're still meeting in the same room. And it was like, I'm Groundhog Day. And it took me about a year or two as the Lord began to just like work on me and just say, like, Christian, you are getting to impact people's lives while they're still malleable. Like, in all those studies that we all know, right? Of all the faith decisions made before they're 14 or they're 18 or whatever, study you want to pick. Like, and I had to shift. And then for like the next in my 30s, I loved it. And even now, like I'm 46 and I don't get to work with teens as much, but I've started coaching. I love being around teenagers, even like there's something about investing in young people because you know that it's going to last. It's something that's going to get imprinted on their soul, on the way they view life, on the way they view themselves. Like I cannot tell you, one of my favorite things to do is to look a teenager in the eye and speak truth to them that runs contrary to what they've been told by people in their life or being told by culture. And to say, like, to look in the eye and be like, you matter. Like your life is a gift. Like you're going to do something good with this or whatever, like specific things that people have said to them, you can contradict. And so I would say, you got me going there, sorry, but I would say to youth workers, like, it matters. Like, and it feels so much like it doesn't. It can feel like you're planting seeds and planting seeds and planting seeds and planting seeds. And nothing's like the needle's barely moving, or maybe it's going backwards, but just don't give up because what you're doing matters. And honestly, sometimes you have to stay in the game. Like I did youth ministry for 20 years and I got to see the fruit in these teens becoming adults, becoming parents, still following Jesus. And so that would be what I would say to encourage.
And what do you think? Like, so now as a lead pastor, of course you can see the world a little differently. Like, man, I have all this stuff I'm trying to figure out how to do. What do you think is important for lead pastors to think about when they think about youth, ministry, families in their church are trying to raise teenagers? How has your perspective shifted? Maybe just because you're getting older, but also because you're in a different chair.
Yeah.
Because lead pastors have to think, okay, generally this is the group that destroys the room that we put them in. The budget can fluctuate, right? Like you could spend 10 times on your youth ministry in whatever size church you are. It doesn't even matter. And spend it all easily. You could spend 1/10 and might see about the same kind of thing. So like it can feel hard to know how do we prioritize this kind of work, and how do I support a youth pastor, and what should I be doing for families, and what would you want to say to lead pastors, especially because you are one, as they think about this really vital ministry as you just described?
Yeah, and not that I've done all of this right the whole time, but what I would like to say is that we need to make teens and kids a priority in our church. And I think we all get that, but then you have to figure out, what does that actually mean?
Yep.
Like how do are we just saying that so people like bring their kids to us, or does that actually get lived out? And so, I've tried to. This is where I say, like, man, my youth director is going to listen to this, so I hope he agrees. But I've tried to really be available, like, to him, and like be intentional with him, and he and his wife kind of do it together. So with both of them, like, they know that I think that they're champions. Like, they know that Mandy and I will be there for them in a heartbeat. Like, so I want them to feel like they're never alone, that we haven't locked them in this room on Wednesday night and just like hope to never see them again. Right. I want to be able to say yes to everything that they want, right? Like, we have an idea. Yes. We want to try this new thing. Yes. Like, we want to have a big yes towards the teens and the kids. And I also think a lot about, like, how does Sunday morning, is it teen friendly? Like, when I preach, can a teenager make it through my message? Yeah. If not, I need to change. I mean, this is maybe being a little too forceful, but I think you need to change how you teach. Like, sure. I should be able to teach 25, 30 minutes, and a teenager should be able to listen to it and not get bored out of their mind. Yes. And get something out of it, and have me talk about, this is how it applies to being a teenager. Like, there are teenagers in the room every time I preach, and I don't want them to feel like it's just pointed at their parents. So those are a few thoughts. I'm sure that there's a lot more that other people could come up with.
No, those are great. No, I think keeping those audiences in mind, caring for those leaders is critical. Yeah, I mean, I would encourage every senior leader to at least spend some time in some environment with your youth group. Yep. So if that
I got one more.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you. And
no, do it.
Make a way for your teens to get to events. Everybody who's ever grown up as a teenager in the church knows how pivotal those events are. Yeah. Whatever, find the money in the budget, get the kids there, pay for the buses, get the scholarship money, get every kid who wants to go to that winter retreat, to Project Timothy, to the missions trip. Yeah. Oh man, those things they're life-changing.
They are.
I never want lack of attention or lack of finances to stand in the way of a kid's life being changed, It's
huge. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I just think, I'm aware. I'm in the same life stage you're in. I'm really aware how much my girls have kept me young, because I listen to the music they're listening to. I get to watch the movies they're watching. I get to hear the conversations they're having with their friends. And then by grace, we've stayed pretty connected to them. They have their friends over, and their friends know us, and we know them, and we know their parents, and sports help, because we're on sidelines with parents talking about stuff. But I'm really aware that I'm coming to a shift here, and they're not going to be as accessible. They're already not as accessible, but they'll be way less accessible when they're in college. And sort of my natural connection to people of a certain age is going to start to diminish. Yeah. It won't be as easy to hear music they're listening to, or hear the sort of banter of what they talk about. And so for me, Danielle and I've been talking about this. How do we just try to do a small discipleship thing with the youth group? How do I stay connected to a thing that wouldn't make me kind of annoying? Like, I don't want to demand my youth leader have me in the room when they're like, it'd be better to not have you there. But how can I actually be helpful and be connected? Notice, I'm struck by your story of pastors just riding along in cars. Like, yeah, I'd love to go to that event. Just going to see what you're doing and be able to pray. And that is not a small move. That's a big decision to make. To be connected, to be aware. Yeah. Whenever I'm at a Vineyard event, you've seen me, I always duck in. I always want to stand around and watch. Like, what does the music sound like? What does it feel like to be in this room? What are we teaching? How are they ministering to each other? What kind what's happening in here? I just want to be, I'm always like trying to sneak in and out of those rooms to like notice how it feels. Again, it's easier when my kids are of the right age.
Right.
It'll be harder later, but it's making a commitment to that. I watched, I'm from Columbus Vineyard. I watched Rich lead discipleship groups for youth group, even as his kids were, out of the home. He's like, I just want to hear what they're talking about. I want to talk through the Bible with them. That is a huge decision to make as a lead pastor. But
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm still in that stage as well, and so it's kind of natural. It's funny, I stopped going on trips as the youth leader, but I go as dad still.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I'm still on all the trips, and like I was thinking, like, will I go on these when I don't have a biological kid, on the trip? Because I still love them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I get invited to different youth events, and I'm like, I'd love to go. Yeah, I'll go and do my one talk that they might later be like, that was the worst ever because that guy's so old and has no idea what's going on. But it benefits me, if nothing else. Yeah. Like, oh man, I get to be in the room. I get to see what this is like and see folks praying for each other and spot new leaders and all that stuff. That really matters as a lead pastor and in the movement. So yeah, I could not be more grateful for you, Christian, and the investment you've made in the vineyard, not just in your region, though obviously in your region, but across the country. And the events that we try to do, you're always thinking and praying, the resources. You've just been really faithful for a really long time, and I'm really, really grateful.
Well, I appreciate that. And, honestly, like Phil Strout came to me, however many, I think it was 2009 or something, and was like, invited me to start leading regionally after, it was Chris Schlotterbeck and Jenna Stepp before me, and like just incredible people have built a legacy. And it was, I just feel like it's been just one of the great privileges of my life to have the chance to work with teenagers, all the teenagers that I've met that have become adults now across the country. Like those are all gifts, and all the adults, like people I've done youth ministry with, that and that I'm getting to meet. Like we just had this national conference and I met brand new youth leaders that I've never met before, and it just feels the same every time. Like I'm just so grateful for that opportunity, and I'm cognizant of the fact it won't last forever, right? So it's a season of my life. It's been a long one, but I'm just grateful for the opportunity that you've continued to extend and anyway, just legitimately, like I'm not just blowing smoke. Like it is one of the great joys of my life to have had the chance to work regionally and nationally with the young people in the movement, and I'm just super grateful.
Amen. Yeah, and this is cue all the cliches that are true. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. But I mean, like,
wow,
they're not.
You should trademark that. That's really good. I mean, I can't believe you just came up with that off the top of your head.
Just give them a sense of pride to make it easier. With the children's laughter. Anyway, but it's.
I feel like we should all hold hands, just like.
I mean, but
America.
But a lot of cliches are cliches because they're true. Like, like there really isn't a future without generations blessing other generations. Those things sound nice on postcards and in large meetings, but they're real, and they have to take place in life-on-life relationships in small churches and big churches and living rooms. And I'm just encouraged to hear your story. It gives hope that like you don't have to have some kind of magical vision. You can just bless whoever's in front of you and help them fumble their way through.
Yep.
It is amazing how simple it really gets when you get to brass tacks. Like that's what it takes. It takes noticing a younger person, giving them a little rope, encouraging them, showing up. I mean, it's all the same little moves, isn't it? And I'm just grateful to hear your story and how you've invested in that. And I have hope. I have so much hope for the Vineyard because I do see what you see. I see the marks of these new leaders, and I see churches prioritizing this work. And like we said, whatever is hard, whatever is against us is not scary for God.
No, not insurmountable.
He's able to do this. So,
yeah.
And
every time I would just I know we're ending, but just it goes both ways. Like as we give down, because if you think about like us giving it into the teenagers, they just give back to us like
massively.
They're just untapped ideas and energy and spiritual gifts which is one reason, and this is kind of what you're saying, that it keeps you young, but like there's something about being around the next generation of believers that'll just jumpstart your faith.
Yeah.
So I love making room for them in sort of a selfish way as well.
That's right. Yeah. For our own development. Yeah.
It's good for us.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for making time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.